Chapter 4, The Old Rugged Cross. In February 1989, Ava Ansley and I reached our goal of opening a new nonprofit law center in Tuscaloosa, dedicated to providing free quality legal services to condemned men and women on death row in Alabama. We never thought it would be easy, but it turned out to be even harder than we'd expected. Obstacles were multiplying rapidly. We were denied state funding, and after several disheartening meetings with our board, it had become clear that we had no support in the state for the project. On top of that, there weren't many lawyers who would do full-time death penalty work for less than $25,000 a year in Alabama. Eva and I realized that we would have to do it on our own and raise the money ourselves. We regrouped and started again, this time in Montgomery, the state capital. The project would eventually be named the Equal Justice Initiative, EJI. In the summer of 1989, we signed a lease on a small building near downtown Montgomery, a two-story Greek Revival house built in 1882, painted yellow and with a charming porch that made it feel open and welcoming. It felt like a good start and a nice contrast from the courtrooms, waiting rooms, and prison walls that our clients' family members had to face. The office was cold in the winter. It was almost impossible to keep squirrels out of the attic, and there wasn't enough electricity to run the copier and a coffee pot at the same time without blowing a fuse. But from the start, it felt like a home and a place to work, and given the hours we would spend there, it was always a little of both. A flood of execution dates awaited us. Between 1975, when Alabama's new death penalty statute was passed, and the end of 1988, there had been only 3 executions in Alabama. But by 1989, driven by shifting policies and laws, the number of people executed by the state of Alabama would double. Months before our center opened, I started visiting Alabama's death row every month, traveling from Atlanta to see a handful of new clients, including Walter McMillian. They were all grateful for the help, but as the spring of 1989 approached, they all made the same request at the end of our meetings. Help Michael Lindsay. Lindsay's execution was scheduled for May 1989. I painfully explained how limited our time and resources were, and how frantic we were, trying to get the new EJI office up and running. Although they said they understood, they clearly felt anguish and guilty about getting legal assistance while other men faced looming executions. Lindsay's lawyer, David Bagwell, was a respected civil attorney from Mobile. But prisoners got word of a letter Bagwell had written and talked about it amongst themselves, especially one chilling line. I generally favor the death penalty because mad dogs ought to die. Many prisoners were appalled by this attitude, from someone who was supposedly an advocate for them. They became even more distrustful of lawyers, even the ones who claimed to help. We decided to do what we could for Michael Lindsay, whose execution date was fast approaching. We tried to make arguments about an interesting twist in that case. His jury had never decided that he should be executed at all. He received a sentence of life imprisonment without parole from his jury, but the judge had overridden it, instead imposing a death sentence. This was unusual and was likely because this judge was trying to appear tough on crime in order to get reelected. We wrote a letter to the governor of Alabama, Guy Hunt, asking him to stop the Lindsay execution on the grounds that the jury had decided against putting him to death. Governor Hunt quickly denied our request for clemency, declaring that he would not go against the wishes of the community expressed by the jury that Mr. Lindsay be put to death. Even though we stressed that the community's representatives, the jury, had done the opposite, they clearly elected to spare Lindsay's life. It didn't matter. He was electrocuted on May 26, 1989. The first execution I witnessed was that of my client Herbert Richardson, a Vietnam War veteran whose brutal, nightmarish experiences left him traumatized and scarred by post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. One of the country's least discussed post-war problems is how frequently combat veterans bring the traumas of war back with them and are incarcerated after returning to their communities. Herbert became one of thousands of combat veterans who end up in jail or prison after completing their military service. I had promised Herbert I would be with him during the execution, and when I arrived at the prison, it was completely dark. Outside the prison entrance were dozens of men with guns. State troopers, local police officers, deputy sheriffs, and what appeared to be part of National Guard unit. It was surreal to see all of these armed men gathered near midnight to make sure a life would be taken without incident. When I got inside the visiting room, Herbert's wife and her family had less than an hour left with him to say goodbye. He was calmer than I had ever seen him. He smiled at me when I walked in and gave him a hug. "Hey y'all, this is my lawyer," he said, introducing me with a pride that was surprising and moving to me. I spent the next 45 minutes with one eye on the clock, knowing that soon the guards would take Herbert to the back and we would never see him alive again. When the clock struck 10 p.m., the guards dragged his weeping wife and family away with great difficulty. 30 minutes before the execution, I was brought to the cell next to the execution chamber deep inside the prison, where Herbert was being held until it was time to put him in the electric chair. They had shaved the hair off his body to facilitate a clean execution. The state had done nothing to modify the electric hair since the disastrous John Evans execution. I felt distraught. I had tried to read up on what should happen at an execution. I had some naively misguided hope that I could save Herbert if they did something incorrectly. Herbert was much more emotional when he saw me than he'd been in the visitation room. It must have been humiliating to be shaved in preparation for an execution. He looked shaken and upset. When I walked into the chamber, he grabbed my hand and asked if we could pray, and we did. When we were done, his face took on a distant look, and then he turned to me. "Hey man, thank you. I know this isn't easy for you either, but I'm grateful to you for standing with me," he said with great emotion. I smiled and gave him a hug. His face sagged with an unbearable sadness. "It's been a very strange day, Brian, really strange. Most people who feel fine don't get to think all day about this being their last day alive with certainty that they will be killed. It's different than being in Vietnam. Much stranger." He nodded at all the officers who were milling about nervously. It's been strange for them, too. All day long, people have been asking me, "What can I do to help you?" When I woke up this morning, they kept coming to me. "Can we get you some breakfast?" At midday, they came to me. "Can we get you some lunch?" All day long, "What can we do to help you?" Herbert sighed. "More people have asked me what they can do to help me in the last 14 hours of my life than ever asked me in the years I was coming up." He looked at me, and his face twisted in confusion.